Hey everyone, welcome to Quick Preach, your online channel for short messages about God. Today we are going to continue with our series titled PERAsonality Development Series. Now, this series deals with pera, or the Filipino word for money. Now, we started with our first sub-series, which is the four basic money-related characters, and we've already discussed the first three, and now we're ending it with episode 4, Giving Generously. Now, before anything else, let me acknowledge my main references for this preaching, which are the New International Version Bible and the It's Not About the Money preaching series by Victory Church Philippines, from which this particular message was adapted from. Let's begin. So, we started our sub-series with discussions that about money, and we learned that it's not the actual money that is important. In the first lesson, we learned that the heart of the person holding the money instead is more important than money, and we learned that the heart can only choose between loving God or loving money. In the second lesson, we were told to focus on the source from which the money comes from instead. So we learned that God owns everything, and what is more important to look at is not the money itself, but where the money originates from, uh, which is from God. In the third lesson, we were told to look at the attitude of the person handling the money. So we learned about the parable of the talents, and we learned that um, money is only borrowed, and we were asked by God to manage His money. And what is important is how we handle the money that was lent by God to us. Now, finally, in this fourth and final episode of the sub-series, we are told to still not think about of the money, but instead about letting go of the money so that others may benefit from it. So, at this point, let's take a look at our key passage for this preaching, which is 2 Corinthians chapter 8 verses 1 to 7. So, the passage says, Verse 1, And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. Verse 2, In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. 3, For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. Verse 4, They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. Verse 5, And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. 6, So we urge Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. Verse 7, But since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, and knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, see that you excel in the grace of giving. So the gist of the is that Paul was reminding the church of Corinth, that's why it's Corinthians, regarding the support they promised and the grace that was given by God to the Macedonian churches. Paul wanted the Corinthians to learn true generosity using the lives of those serving in the Macedonian churches. So let's see what the characteristics or what are the attitudes of the people serving in the Macedonian churches have. What do they have? So that we will be able to understand what true generosity is. Let's break this information into digestible points. So, main point number one, the people from the Macedonian churches, they gave out of severe trial. Now, that is something. The Macedonians did not only give while they are having problems, they gave in the middle of, see the adjective that they used, very severe. Severe meaning intense or great. So, they gave despite having great problems. All of us have experienced challenges, and we know that problems can test our character. No wonder Paul admired the Macedonians, for it is easy to give when we have plenty, when we have very few to no concerns. But when we learn to give when we are suffering, that is a very clear manifestation of God's grace. So you can see that the Macedonians were probably suffering, and yet they remain to have this attitude of giving. So sometimes we need to pay our own monthly bills, we are physically ill, we just lost our job, we have unexpected expenses. So this is something that God wants from us to give, to still give despite having these problems. So this is very Christian like. And we see that true generosity is when we continue to focus on others despite our very own problems. Let's look at the second attitude of the people from the Macedonian churches. Main point number two, they gave out of overflowing joy. So let's look at the verse again. So there, overflowing joy. So now it became even more challenging. The Macedonians did not only give just to help, they gave with joyfulness. There was not an inch of selfishness nor a tinge of hesitation, so they were not hesitant to give. Have you ever received something from a person who was so selfish or who showed heaviness in his or her heart when they were giving that something? There's a feeling of uneasiness knowing that the person giving does not really want you to have the item. So, as such, a person who gives with a heavy heart exhibits hypocrisy, not generosity. So, this is something that God wants us to be reminded of, that whenever we give out of joy. And the Lord does not appreciate any attitude that about giving with a heavy heart. So, in fact, it may have been better if that person simply kept the item instead of giving it with selfishness, with a heart of selfishness. So, again, so the Macedonian churches, they gave out of joy. Main point number three, they gave out of extreme poverty. Now it becomes even more difficult, right? The Macedonians were not just poor, they were, if you see the adjective that was used here, extremely poor. But what is poor according to the United Nations? According to the International Organization, a poor person eats only one meal per day, has no slippers or shoes, has no access to potable water, and has no shelter or place to sleep. Now, do you think you qualify to this criteria? So if you don't qualify to this criteria, then you are not poor. Now imagine the Macedonians who are extremely poor, meaning they meet these requirements and yet they are still able to give. The Macedonian churches gave even when they themselves are lacking. Further, the Macedonian churches gave without conditions. They did not say, once we have money, that's the time when we'll give, right? So they gave not without, they gave without ifs and buts. So they did not need any condition to give. Even though they're poor, they still were willing to open their hands to others. So there we go with our conclusion. In Mark 12, verses 41 to 44, Jesus compared rich people who gave only a small portion from their money with the poor widow who gave the remaining cents she has. Now, Jesus made it clear to the disciples that the widow gave more than the rich. How come? Why? Maybe because she demonstrated the attitude similar to those exhibited by Macedonian churches. She gave out of severe trial. She was very poor. She was probably suffering because of her poverty with overflowing joy. So, um, even though she has a few cents, she gave everything, and in spite of extreme poverty. So, again, it was mentioned that she was a poor widow compared to the rich people in the church. So, Only when we have possessed these attitudes do we show true generosity. For true generosity is not when we give something, rather, it is when we give everything, even our very own selves. See? So that's a very, very quick message about giving generously. Thank you very much for finishing this very short video. If you enjoyed this message, click the like button and share to others. If you have any comments or suggestions or would like me and my colleagues to pray for you, you may use the comment section or email us at quickpreach@gmail.com. If you wish to watch more short messages, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notifications to be reminded if a new video has been uploaded. You can also browse for videos of series that have been previously discussed. We are looking forward to sharing more with you. God bless.